Thank you. Thank you for staying here. I will be talking about the 19th century bourgeoisie, which as a social group had a lot of characteristics in common. Among other things, at least in the first half of the 19th century, there was this passion for exotic goods of animal origins, and they were then used for clothing, jewelry, and other kinds of ornaments. But at the same time, or especially from the mid 19th century on, a new love for animals and form of animal welfare started appearing. And it mushroomed, especially in the form of voluntary associations. And one of them, that was established in 1852 Trieste, is what I will be looking into. So here is Trieste. I know some of you are not from the region. Here, right? It was a major city back then, especially in terms of its port. Okay, so a lot of things that were happening in that era, in fact, it started in Trieste. So also this association was one of the first in Europe, and it was very prominent, in fact. There are 2 points I'll be trying to show. That the bourgeoisie active in this association spent most of its time denouncing the practices of the working class and the rural population. They repeatedly accused them of being, I quote, immoral and uncivilized. And then secondly, the historical evidence on this association provides an insight into the seemingly always clear and fixed boundary between the human and the non-human animal world, so to say. Well, we know that the categories of human and animals are always cultural artifacts. And it is a fact that in the course of 19th century, many scientific theories were established, among them, of course, Darwin's notable theory, but still, the presentation goes beyond the scientific discourse and illustrates this broader bourgeois perception of the scientifically incongruous but socially powerful idea of animal-human divide. And to this extent, in presenting the situation on the ground, I will stick to the so-called emic perspective, or to what historical actors use when talking about humans on the one hand and animals on the other. One last note before diving into my presentation. Donkeys, dogs, and other animals surely are protagonists that play a role in my presentation, but I examine especially the human perspective on animals. Okay, so in these terms, I'm quite anthropocentric. So I guess you're all acquainted with the first steps of the animal rights movement that started in the first half of the 19th century, of course, building on former Christian ideas that considered animal care to be a part of human duty. But in this period of time, animal welfare was not just an idea shared by some crazy ladies or some intellectually too avant-garde people, but it was starting to become a more mainstream idea. And it emerged as a social movement and also as a political agenda accepted by a growing part of, and this is important, nobility and the bourgeoisie. Critics of animal cruelty first formed a Society for the Protection of Animals in 1824 London in England. By the middle of the century, many such associations were then established in France and Switzerland, and also in the Habsburg monarchy and elsewhere. The establishment of such associations was made possible by the newly appearing freedom of joining in civil associations, but also it was very much linked to the processes of secularization, urbanization, the expansion of middle classes, the romanticizing of nature, and this general growing affection for the animal world and the increasing number of family pets. And to illustrate this further, with a case from Trieste. And Trieste, there was a very important member of the society called Isabel Burton, also known as Lady Burton. Her husband is actually much more famous. He's Sir Richard Burton. I'll leave you to Google him if you want to, because I don't have enough time to get into this. But they had a lot of pets, and among them there was a dog they had, was called Nip. And Nip had a birthday. This dog had also a cradle, had coats or proper clothing that he or she would wear. And then if this dog was sick, would get medications, and after her death, also a tombstone. So it was a family member for sure. Even more, this dog accompanied the two of them to India, to England, and many trips they took. But all this love for animals, as I said, was something that really appeared in the 19th century when it became mainstream, and it mushroomed in form of many associations. So in Trieste, there was this association that initially attracted almost 500 members. And from its beginnings on, it was very numerous. It was the first such association on the Apennine Peninsula, and according to many, also the first Italian association for animal lovers. The second one appeared in Turin, Torino, only decades later. And despite the fact that many people joined this association, I have to mention that a lot of local residents ridiculed this society. They thought it was nonsense to have such an association, but the members were not bothered, because this was sort of a typical response at that period of time, also in other places across the globe, right? The rules of the association envisaged the association to, I quote, reduce the amount of unnecessary and unreasonable cruelty to animals. They wanted to improve the conditions in which animals lived and to convince people to treat animals more gently, right? Like other similar associations, they attempted to reach also a wider audience through their many publications. The members attached great importance also to their influence on children, and not only on children, but on all those who were connected to children, so parents, priests, and teachers, of course. Another thing they did was also some sort of public shaming. In their publications, the members listed the names and surnames of individuals fined for mistreatment of animals. I guess you know that already in the 19th century, you would get fined for mistreating your animal, or it didn't have to be yours, or you would also get to be imprisoned for sometimes numerous days if you did something considered bad or actually against the law. So you can read more here. Following the example of other associations, they also used positive incentives to try to change people. In Trieste from 1853, so just a year after the association was formed, awards were given to good livestock keepers. The award ceremonies were then big public performances that were held in splendid halls, all decorated. There would be a military band, and usually a member would have a talk. Some would have very long talks, like the previously mentioned Lady Burton. She was once proudly speaking for 3/4 of an hour. But we don't hear much about the prize winners, though. We don't know their side of the story, but these were generally poorer carriage drivers, poultry sellers, butcher servants, and so on. So their experiences remain rather unreported. Regarding the membership, the interest, as already stated, in improving the conditions in which animals lived emerged and spread among the wealthier inhabitants of the city. It attracted the progress-oriented, wealthy urban elite. In other words, associations against animal torture were one of the bourgeoisie's leisure rituals. Although, according to the rules, anyone, regardless of their gender, age, or social status, could become a member. In fact, the members were mainly from the upper social strata. So these were mainly dignitaries. The membership list of animal protection societies also reveals something else, and this is an unusually large number of women. Again, this is not typical only for Trieste. It was one of the few public spaces in mid-19th century Trieste that allowed women to participate, but not only that, they could also work on their own ideas. It was sort of a window into the social world for them. And here I have to bring to mind the already mentioned Lady Burton. I'm not at the beginning of my research, so it's really hard to summarize. I know a lot about her and her work, but she was really important for this association. And upon her move to Trieste, which happened in 1872 because her husband became the British consul in Trieste, she joined this association and played a crucial role in the society. But anyways, despite the triumphs of her and a few of her colleagues, the number of women was still small and most of all limited to the social elite. So there were only wealthy ladies that would join this association. So we can hardly talk of a more general participation of women in the movement's activities. To repeat, Trieste's social society for the protection of animals was built on the formula of class. Promoters of the animal protection movement held themselves in high regard, considering themselves as, I quote, civilized, progressive, and liberal. Based on these premises, animal protectors sought to influence the supposedly problematic attitudes farmers and workers held toward animals. To the bourgeois, animal lovers feeling kindness in workers and farmers appeared to be accumulating points on this imaginary index of civilization. And although the members thought very highly of themselves, they overlooked the fact that their own relationship with animals was very limited, and most of all, fundamentally different from the relationship the rural populations had with their animals. For lower classes, animals were everyday companions and natural resources upon which their lives depended, and not friends, not ornaments, objects of study, or proper family members. Many grand scholars tackled the changing attitude to animals that took course in the 18th but predominantly 19th century. Michel Foucault wrote extensively about the replacement of the external control, cruelty, and physical violence by subtle discipline, as he called it. He understood it as a refined tool in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Foucault and Norbert Elias, a historian, agreed about the gradual learning of exercising control over one's body. According to both, the new techniques for regulating bodies were not merely innocent efforts to improve the conditions of animal life, but were primarily instruments for establishing and maintaining social power. Similarly, Swedish ethnologists Jonas Wickman and Orvar Löfgren approached these questions. They explained the gradual dominance of bourgeois cultural patterns in Sweden. According to them, the bourgeoisie believed to be far superior to proletarians who whipped their horses. For Swedish townspeople, kindness to animals served as a means of legitimating their cultural superiority. So also in their eyes, the treatment of animals was a tool in the cultural struggle between social classes. And to push this point further, in reality, animals were, according to these two authors, often protected before the abolition of slavery and the implementation of the first measures safeguarding children from the worst forms of exploitation of factors. As already suggested also in Trieste, individuals dedicated to animal protection endeavored to, I quote, civilize the ignorant masses, who were believed to lack the proper relationship with animals. Primary recipients of the sharp criticisms were the rural residents. To illustrate, the great Lady Burton enjoyed doing rounds to witness the lives of animals with her own eyes. She frequently visited a horse dealer living on the outskirts of Trieste, where she discovered, I quote, 4 dogs on bare ground in a dark hole without food and drink. Upon visiting this unfortunate place, which filled her soul with, I quote, horror and disgust, the exclamation from Dante came to her mind, I quote, abandon all hope ye who enter. On another occasion, she sadly commented on an abattoir. I quote again, an ugly hole without drainage, where blood, when water is lacking, spreads and contaminates the purest and healthiest air of our surroundings. She was all but lonely in her complaints. Her fellow members were also frequently shocked by the treatment of animals. And then, I'll be short now, the working class was another obstacle, especially the way they entertained themselves. And here I'm referring to pigeon shooting. This was a popular form of blood sport among workers, but this was not the only sport, right? In case of Trieste, also ethnic affiliation helped the members to pinpoint specific targets. The association's co-founder emphasized that they make strong efforts to instill tenderness towards animals also outside of the city, inhabited by the Slavic population. To be noted, the equation of the Slavic population with barbarism and a lower level of civilization has a long history in this region, and then it reaches its peak in the fascist era. In all of their criticisms, the members of the society did not emphasize solely the actions themselves, but denied culture, morality, and civilization to the supposed torturers. In other words, they did not stop for the practices, but straightaway valorized the people's character. Records of the Society for the Protection of Animals of Trieste are filled with judgments in which the authors withheld humanity from the torturers who brutally transported their donkeys to the market or did some other, according to the members, inappropriate deed. In one of their founding documents, the Society's founders wrote, I quote, "Animal society is contrary to the principles of morality that shape the foundation of a civilized world. The guardianship of animals is most often entrusted to a class of people who lack culture and are therefore brutal towards animals." Lady Burton also labeled those who treated animals cruelly as inhumane. And then she went a step further when she referred to a man called Anton Schraber from a village nearby Trieste who he threw his dog into an abyss. And then she called him as a beast in human form. From the words of Lady Burton and her like-minded collaborators resonates a prominent belief that presupposes mistreating animals as equal to a lack of humanity, perhaps to an extent that the allegedly cruel individuals were, according to them, less human than animal-like. Animal rights activists from Trieste were not an exception in their narrow comprehension of what it means to be human. This boundary was also narrated by other, for example, Philip Howell, but I will not go into this in order not to be too long. But anyways, this animal-human divide is anything but innocent. The members of the Society of Trieste and other like-minded activists self-identified not only as more refined or simply better, but as a human or as humans, while arbitrarily excluding lower classes from this category of human. To summarize, distinctive understanding on where animal ends and human begins developed among animal rights activists. Although not articulated theoretically, the perspective of animal protectors was well and alive in the everyday life of much of the 19th century bourgeoisie. By contracting the category of human to exclude lower classes, the bourgeoisie set up their own alternative view of the animal-human divide that reflected their ideas about who belonged to their world and who doesn't belong to their world. In conclusion, during the examined period, the activities of the studied association resemble those of similar associations across Europe, contributing to a fundamental transformation of human-animal relations. Advocates for animal rights were firmly convinced they were doing only good and encouraged the working class and rural population towards compassion for animals, albeit from the comfort of their villas while listening to the canaries and caressing their well-groomed dogs. The influence of such associations is evident in numerous public measures that already in the 19th century eradicated violence against animals from the street of urban Europe, while simultaneously conditioning and reinforcing the transmission of bourgeois values. Yet in addition to that, the way the activists treated their animals served also as an instrument in one of the 19th century most important processes, and that is the creation of the social distinction between the bourgeoisie on the one hand and the workers and the farming population on the other. Thank you.